of you probably disagreed with the thesis that Jane McGonigal put forth in her TED Talk on gaming. I disagreed with it too. She said that gamers get these following 4 benefits, and I actually think that innately, yes, there are benefits, but in the magnitude that she was discussing and the magnitude in which we see these 4 things in the younger generations, I actually think they're relatively pernicious. So I have my own fights to pick with all 4 of them, but the one that really caught my eye was her whole conception of epic, a greater meaning. And I really like this because I think it perfectly illustrates something that I'm going to be discussing a lot in my presentation, which is the coddling of Generation Z. When you coddle someone, they become unrealistically optimistic. And McGonigal, and she's not alone in this, McGonigal seemed to think that this really intense optimism was a good thing. You know, she was talking about how everyone's going to go off and solve the world's problems, but when you have everyone off solving the world's problems, in theory, yes, that's great, but then there's no one left behind to do the often overlooked jobs that a society depends on equally as much, if not more so. So, to wrap up this preliminary tangent, and I'll return to this idea later on, epic meaning is severely overrated, and I think it's far too sought after amongst Gen Zs. So when I say Gen Z, that includes anyone born from 1997 to around the mid-2000s. And there's this really unique trend that's seen in Generation Z of an unhealthy mental state. So it's evidenced here in this graph that Gen Zs seek out far more mental health treatment than other generations do. And the argument has been made that self-reporting is not a great way to go as far as evidence goes, and that is very true. However, there's also behavioral data to corroborate it, and it's pretty well proven that Generation Z has higher rates of depression. So then the question that arises is, why is this happening? And this is what I was seeking to prove in my research paper. And the conclusion I ended up coming to was that there are 2 main contributors. There's a lack of childhood freedom, and there's increased academic pressure. So in regards to the lack of childhood freedom, these are statistics from these are FBI preliminary statistics, 2008 to 2009, and it shows that crime is going down. However, a Gallup poll of the same time period, 2009, showed that 74% of Americans incorrectly thought that crime is getting worse. And this is just one data point. There's a bunch of data from a variety of different years that all show the same exact thing. We suck at telling how bad crime is at any given period of time. And so from this, helicopter parenting arises. So there was one study from 1981 to 1997 of kids aged 6 through 8, and it showed that in that time period there was a 25% decrease in time allotted to play. And then in a far more recent survey of approximately 830 US mothers, when they were asked why they weren't allowing their children to go outside and play as much, they said they feared for their child's safety. So, okay, it's bad enough that this helicopter parenting has become a societal norm. Even worse is the fact that even the outlier parents who want to let their children go out and play and be independent are not completely at liberty to do so anymore because of Child Protective Services, CPS. Don't get me wrong, CPS does a lot of good, they do save a lot of kids, but on a myriad of occasions they've also acted very poorly. So, one piece of background information, a non-victim is a child who was being investigated by CPS for some reason, and then it turned out that they weren't actually being neglected or abused. So in a 2012 report on CPS, it was shown that in that 1 year, 101,425 non-victims, so children, were taken from their homes and put into foster care for some period of time by CPS. So this is all just evidence for the fact that Gen Zs didn't really get as much of a childhood as other generations did. They didn't get to go outside and play and be independent and be free. So now, bear with me through this next part. It gets a little confusing. There's good data in rats that suggests that play plays a significant role in control. Across species, play helps young develop personal control. And probably not coincidentally, it's also been shown that Gen Zs have far less personal control than other generations did when they were young. And not surprisingly, this lack of perceived personal control is linked to anxiety. And again, not surprisingly, anxiety is linked to depression. So, to sum up everything that I just said, a lack of childhood freedom leads to not developing enough personal control, and this puts kids at higher risk of anxiety and depression. So then the next thing you come to is, okay, if all this time that used to be spent playing in childhood is no longer spent playing, what are kids doing? A lot of it is academics. The academic load has gotten a lot harder for kids. And interestingly enough, kids have kind of taken to it. Their academic ambitions have shown to be going up. Unfortunately, they've become increasingly unrealistic about their academic ambitions. So this is a study from 1976 to 2000 in which researchers they asked a bunch of high school seniors about their academic and professional goals, and then they followed up to see if they actually achieved those goals. And so the shaded area basically shows how unrealistic these seniors over time were being in regards to a specific goal. So this graph doesn't look too bad. It's a little hopeful. No one's really getting too worse as far as unrealistic optimism goes. However, then you see that a lot of the other graphs for the majority of the other goals looked more like this. And you see that kids are getting far more unrealistic about how far they can go professionally and academically. And this does take a toll when childhood has become less of a childhood. As we saw, academics were displacing play. There's much more emphasis on academics, so the stakes are a lot higher, so it takes an even harder hit when you end up failing at the goals that you had set. So what my argument is that a lack of childhood freedom and the presence of unrealistic academic optimism, which are both results of coddling, those are the two main causal factors of high depression and anxiety rates in Generation Z. And I think the best way to attack this domino effect, that's why I have the dominoes, is to get in at the very beginning. If you can reinstitute childhood freedom and play, as we already saw, there's links between play, control, and depression, so that has its own benefits. But then also, if kids are getting more time to play, then there is less time for the academic load, so the academic load lightens, and that reduces stress and anxiety. And then when the academic load lightens, then the academic credential inflation goes down, and kids feel less pressure to set these super high goals, then they're more likely to actually achieve these goals, and everything just sort of balances out.
So Danny, what evidence did you gather that you didn't use in this presentation, and why did you choose not to use it?
I originally had a big bulk of evidence on university campuses and the lack of Gen Z resilience in terms of intellectual and political diversity, and I ended up not using it because as far as cohesiveness of my argument went, it just didn't fit too well, because I was originally going to be looking at consequences of coddling of Generation Z on the different age groups of Generation Z, so childhood and then preteen and teens with the academic stuff, and then university campuses with the older Gen Zs. But I just didn't think, the argument didn't really build on itself with that, so I just tossed out the university stuff.
Cool. And if you had more time, what additional research would you conduct on this issue?
I think the trends with the depression were, albeit morbid, were interesting and deserve to be looked at more, because there's different. I was just looking at overall causal factors for both men and women, but they're depending on the person. So, for example, one piece of research that I came across when I was doing research for this project that I didn't follow up on because it wasn't significant enough, was that social media plays more into the depression of females because it's a medium for intersexual female competition, whereas for men, the intersexual competition between men is more physical and less social, so social media didn't have as big of an effect. So I think it would be more interesting to delve into the specific gender
Thank you.